Hey, you courageous family and friends. Thank you for taking a moment to jump on and watch what we're talking about here today and in some of the following weeks. I've had a sense for quite some time now that there will be, in the coming months and even years, an increasing interest in how to develop divine wisdom. I think the world is going to part into a couple of categories, but there are those that are filling themselves with technology, information, knowledge, and then there are those who want wisdom, not just to fill their mind up with stuff and clutter, but they want to fulfill their lives with wisdom, with what some of the ancients referred to as virtues. And so I'm going to take some time and walk through a learning module for the next few sections on how to go about that. And I'm framing it in the context of postures. And we've been talking about postures that will increase your willpower so that you have a strong sense of, again, it's what some of the early writers would have referred to as mastery of yourself. Knowing how to master yourself, how to know yourself. In addition to that, it will give you a sense of making your presence, that atmosphere that is around you, tangible so that people can genuinely sense the things that I'm seeing God beginning to do in my own life. Joy, peace, and love, almost like an atmosphere that is constantly around you. And in doing that, I think we're going to begin to experience this kind of divine wisdom that isn't just something that fills our mind, but it's in our heart, and it lives down in here as well, in that place where we have that sense of will, that part of us that makes decisions courageously and follows through with them. So one of the first postures that we would like to look at is that posture of waiting. And we talked about that last week, what it means to wait, to develop patience. There's something that happens in that space that makes us exceptionally strong. My sister is one of these, I guess you could say, well, she's a 2 with the 3 wing if you're familiar with the Enneagram. So she always wants to serve, always wants to help, always looking for opportunities to share of her time and her energy. But there's also this wing that she has if she wants to achieve things, she wants to accomplish stuff. And so how that frequently gets played out is that she'll get so busy doing a bunch of stuff that she kind of gets a little bit disoriented, becomes distracted, and then she's notorious for stories that kind of follow along behind her of funny things that happen to her because she's too distracted. An example of this was she was beginning her first day of work, and she had been looking forward to this job. She was a therapist at Kaiser, so she goes in to meet her boss. And as she's getting ready to go in to meet her boss, of course, just like it is, she's trying to get the kids ready for school, getting them out the door. She's really busy with that going on in her head, trying to make sure that the house is all in order. And one thing leads to another, and she's running late. And the last thing that she wants to do is show up late, right, for her first day at the job. And so she's scrambling, running, kind of pulling herself together, running in to meet her supervisor. And as she runs in to meet her supervisor, she which frequently happens to a lot of us, is we start saying things to try to cover for the anxiousness, the nervousness, the stress, the disarray that is going on all around us as we're trying to juggle this, juggle that, juggle this. And so she's juggling all these things, multitasking, right? Runs in and she looks up and she just glances, glances and sees a picture of someone up on the wall. And she says, "Oh, is that your husband?" Like, these are the first words out of her mouth before she even introduces herself. And it just kind of falls out of her mouth. And her new supervisor looks at her and says, "No, that's Martin Luther King Jr." She said, "I turned around and I looked at the picture," and she said, "I was mortified." And I realized in that moment that my busyness, my world, and everything that was going on, and it had completely distracted me from being able to be present and acknowledge. She said, I apologize profusely. She said, but as I started to apologize, the lady said, but you know, he is kind of good looking. I don't know if you've ever had these kind of moments happen in your life. I think in the world that we live in, we're increasingly becoming distracted humans. So much so, it's very difficult for us to be present with others, present in moments, present even with our own self as we're trying to sit and walk through maybe cycles of grief, or even to enjoy moments, celebratory moments of accomplishment. And this distractedness, this frenziedness that keeps us away from being present, many times camouflages itself. We try to create a busy facade so that we will appear to be important, or in some cases it could be we're trying to hide from something, and so we become very active, very attentive to all these things because we don't want to deal with maybe something that's deeper, a more pressing issue that is going on in our life. And so there are many kinds of distractions that we can face in life, and I'm pointing out the distractions right now as a way of saying that when we are distracted, there is an opportunity for us to be able to pinpoint exactly what is going on inside of us, and to do some incredible work of soaking and sitting in places where wisdom can feed and nurture us and grow us and transform us. There are a lot of distractions, though. Especially in the world that we live in, there are many external distractions. If you have an iPhone or some kind of smart device, or even your computer, you hit these things that say, "Give me a notification," and it's crazy that we'll be in the middle of doing something very important. All of a sudden, that ding goes off, that notification goes off, and as some people, experts have said, it jumps, kind of puts a charge, an arc in the dopamine levels in our body. We're all excited about and we're thinking about this and that, and it immediately throws our attention off of maybe something that was pressing, important, doing homework with our kids, being present with a grandparent, and we find our mind is all the way off on something that's happening in the world of Facebook, or something that's going on with the Citizen app. There's some kind of violent activity going on down the street, or maybe it's something that has come through from the news, and that's dinging. But all of these notifications that are constantly going off on our phone constantly pull us off of, so that we can't be present with what we're doing. And if that's not enough, if it's not notifications, it can be the news. We can get distracted by the news. Somebody says something about something going on in the news, and we find ourselves going down a wormhole, chasing that, and we're not present with what's really going on in our life. Or we find ourselves chasing news stories, jumping from this YouTube channel to that YouTube channel, to what's going on here, what's going on there, and it's almost like there's this nervous energy that's suffocating us, so that we just can't be human, because we're so busy and distracted with everything that's going on around us. It can also be the advertising that goes on in our world that none of us are soliciting. None of us ask for the billboard that we walk across and we see that billboard, and it says, In-N-Out Burger, or it says Gatorade, and instantly we think we're thirsty, or we're hungry, and our mind has got off of something that was pressing or important, and we've got distracted because of some invasive information that has pulled us in and brought us into its place. And if it's not enough that it may be external distractions, we have enough internal dialogue going on inside of us that distract us constantly, questioning our motives. We hear the voice of maybe a parent that we could never please, or we hear the voice of a coach that was always yelling at us, or a teacher that always had that scowling look on their face, and so we feel ashamed because we're not enough, we don't have enough, and so that's constantly distracting us from being able to be present and do something. Or it could be fear, that we live in constant fear that what if I fail this, or what if this isn't good enough, and it's not just right, and so we never step in, because we're just distracted with the tyranny of the imperfect, the tyranny of our own humanity. And so when all of this is going on, frequently we jump to multitasking. We're doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that. There's a recent study in Harvard that said that the multitasking individual or person begins to have display other forms of unhealth. That there are ways in which we start becoming very unhealthy because we're just so scattered, so everything is so skewed about. We don't know where our keys are, we don't know where this is at, and so we're constantly in emotional disarray. And I think as I think of this kind of human struggle that we all have, I realize that there may be times when we think, well, this is something that is just part of the modern world, and it's not. Distractions are as old as humanity. We find ways to distract ourselves from the pressing, more important, pertinent items or issues. We find many times that the distractions themselves reveal to us that our priorities are out of whack. That we're allowing something that is really of no importance invade the things that are very valuable to us or that we esteem as being most important to our lives. And there is this story that we happen upon, an old story that we learn in the Gospel of Luke, a story about Jesus that gives us some insight into what distraction is, what it does, what happens when we're distracted, and it also gives us an anecdote, a wise teaching as to how we can heal ourselves from our distracted ways and actually become sagacious, wise, individuals that are able to be very present with everything, almost like there's a calm energy that surrounds us. The story is in the Gospel of Luke. It's in the 10th chapter. And the setting here is that Jesus has come into a village, and there's a woman there named Martha, and she's invited him into her home. She's doing this mitzvah. She's doing a good deed, which is beautiful. It was part of the Middle Eastern culture of hospitality, of inviting someone in, of sharing a meal with them, of embracing them as they were on a journey, as they were making their way from one point to the next. So she does this. She embraces him. She brings him into her home. And but it says in the 40th verse of this 10th chapter, Luke says, but Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. And so in the midst of all of this, we learn that she is distracted because she has all these things going on. From what we can gather, perhaps it's like she's put together a 7-course meal. And it's not necessary. The necessary thing is just to be present and have maybe some pita bread and some hummus and sit around and enjoy the evening. But she's got so much going on. She has all these preparations going on that she is not able to be present. Somewhat like can happen to us. Frequently, distractions happen when we are worried about things in the future. Too many things in the future. And we're not present with what is right now. And so we get wrapped up in this that's coming down the road. And I'm not sure what it was. It could have been some internal distractions as well. Like she could hear her dad saying, we're a hospitable family, and we go, we pull out all the white linens and we put on a spread and we do the very best, and so get the best chicken, get the best this, get the best that. And she could have all this internal dialogue going on that I'm just not doing enough, and here's something that's very important, and I want to put on a wonderful meal for him. While she is distracted, we're told that her sister Mary, and from what we can gather from this is her younger sister. Her sister Mary is sitting at Jesus's feet listening to what he has to say. So this idea of sitting at a teacher's feet in antiquity was an idiom for being a disciple of, being a student of. We're told that Paul sat at the feet of Gamaliel, meaning he was one of his prized students. To sit at the feet would be a picture of like you're a front row student. You don't want any distractions in your life, so you want to get as close and as near as you possibly can. What is unique, and only Luke records this, what is unique about this is that here we have a woman, a young woman sitting at Jesus' feet. This would have been somewhat taboo. The women were not considered to be in places or postures of being able to be disciples. And so she is, from what we can tell, she is putting herself in a posture. She wants to be at his feet. She wants to listen. Meanwhile, her older sister is working. And she comes out from the back of working, And she says to Jesus, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. So this is something that we learn about people that are distracted. Usually when we're distracted, we look around and we want to blame others for our internal distractions. And Jesus will never criticize her for working, for serving, for putting on a beautiful meal. He's grateful for it. But whenever we begin to judge others, point our finger at them and say, would you have them come? So there's two things really that are at work here. One, she's saying, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work? This kind of language, don't you care, comes up on a couple of occasions with Jesus, some of his disciples, and in other moments. Don't you care that someone's about to die? Don't you care that... And frequently we'll do this. We bring this kind of, we've got our anxieties, our issues, things that we're worried about, things that are our internal issues, and we're saying, don't you care that I'm having to work really hard here? And typically what we've done is we have put way more on us than is necessary. We are distracting ourselves with things that really aren't important. And really what's going on is there's things inside that need to be resolved. They need to be healed. They need to be quieted. They need to be stilled in God's presence. And yet we're just so busy with so much going on that we immediately want to go to, don't you care? And we'll do this with a lot of things, Don't you care that the politics are the way that they are at work or in the country, or that so-and-so is president? Don't you care that my candidate didn't get voted in? Don't you care that taxes have gone up? Don't you care? And we start foisting all of this on God, foisting this on our friends, like just putting this pressure on them, trying to force them to care about things that really are indicative of something else that's going on deep inside of us. The fear, the worry, the lack of a sense of security, the lack of a sense of self, the lack of a sense of belovedness. And so she says this over and over, don't you care? And then the next thing she goes is, tell her to help me. And this is what typically happens. We move from, demanding pity for situations we may have got ourselves into, or for things that are going on inside of us. We move from that over to judging someone else. She's lazy. She's sitting there. She shouldn't be there. She should be here helping me. How dare her? And we start judging someone else. And this is something that Jesus will again and again resist. He'll resist this urge to become a judge and to be a referee between all of our internal conflict and someone else, that we want to either self-justify or blame shift. He doesn't want to be a referee in that. And he responds beautifully to her in this double refrain of her name. He says, Martha, Martha, which is really basically, it's another way of saying to her, it's a very compassionate, it's an endearing way of calling out to someone. This happens frequently in Scripture when someone's name is called twice. And it always comes with an emotional kind of plea and connection. It's as if Jesus is saying, I don't care about the big food that you want to put on display. I don't care about all of that, but I do care about you. I care about your health. I care about you. And so he says, Martha, Martha, like you're the one that's important to me. And he says, you're worried, you're upset about many things. You've got all of these anxieties, all of these worries, all of these stresses going on. Like it's just all over you. That's why you're lashing out. That's why you're acting the way you are, because you've got all of this worry, all of this burden going on. The distractedness, the distracted nature really is a reflection of what's going on inside, of worry, of anxiety, and of being upset about many things that in the grand scheme of reality, these things aren't all that important. He says, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Only one thing is needed. Only one thing is necessary. And he says, Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. In other words, I am not going to take away from her this moment of learning and force her back there to deal with your anxieties and your stresses. This seems a bit harsh. I have had a professor when I was in Gordon Conwell working on my doctoral degree. He was the second year residency professor of preaching. His name was Haddon Robinson, and I remember him getting in class one day reading this text and giving us the title of his text, and the title of his text, of the sermon rather, was "Don't Just Do Something, Sit There." I remember as a kid hearing, people say to me, "Don't just sit there, do something." But when we watch what Jesus is doing here, he's calling us into a particular kind of posture. The posture of sitting, the posture of reflecting, the posture of waiting. That there is something to be said for sitting at the feet of someone. Feet in sandals, those are the symbols of the Greek god, the messenger god Hermes, who is said to have to fly rapidly between the underworld and the upper world, conveying messages from one world to the other. And so feet became the picture of that. We even learned that in Isaiah, that feet are the picture of something that is good and beautiful, when Isaiah says, "How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring the good news." Paul picks up on this, and he repeats it in Romans chapter 10, when he says that, the feet of those that bring the gospel are beautiful. And in Ephesians 6, when he says, "Have your feet shod with the gospel," or with the good news of peace. This idea of sitting at the feet of Jesus is one way of dealing with distractions. It's one way of dealing with the tyranny of the urgent, the constant bombardment of notifications, to slow down, to stop, and just to sit and to be present, to be in a moment with God. This week I had something that was beautiful that happened to me as I was reading this, doing some Lectio Divina on Luke 10, and I just felt, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I felt drawn. I kept hearing in my head over and over that there's a time for everything, right? There's a time to be born, a time to die. And I was drawn to the book of Ecclesiastes. And so I went there to look at this, Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And before I did that, I started reading just a little bit before it to give some context to it. And it occurred to me that the preacher of Ecclesiastes, or the teacher as he sometimes is referred to, begins to go through a series of things that are meaningless in life, right? He talks about the meaninglessness of folly, the meaninglessness of knowledge, trying to gain just more knowledge and more information, the meaninglessness of pleasure. He just says so much is meaningless, and this is in the first chapter and the second chapter. And then he says that toil, that labor, that frenzied activity, that busyness is meaningless. And he says this in the second chapter, verses 17 on down. And I just want to jump to verse 22. He says, "What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days, their work is grief and pain. Even at night, their minds do not rest. This too is meaningless." This busyness, this distraction. He says it's vanity. It's futile. It has nothing that is of substance, nothing that is of eternal wisdom that is remotely connected with this. And at the end, it's just hot air. It's just chasing wind. He says people can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their toil. This too I see is from the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? And this is where he pivots, and he says what life really is all about is being able to find enjoyment. In the story of Mary and Martha, Mary has found enjoyment, being still, being present. Martha, with all this toiling, all this laboring, has not found any enjoyment in it because something's going on. And the preacher here says that quality of enjoyment, of being able to be present, is a God-given gift. It comes from God. He says, to the person who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. And this is what struck me. Whoever we're trying to please is really where we're going to look for our sense of happiness from. And for Mary, that heart of seeking to please Jesus, be present with Jesus, was therapeutic, healing. It was invigorating. He was filling her with divine wisdom and knowledge, whereas her sister was just toiling, laboring. I began to sit there and pray, God, I just want to have a heart to please you. I just want to please you. I've made mistakes. I've done things that aren't pleasing to you. I've said things that I regret. I've acted in ways that aren't consistent with you. But my heart longs to please you. I just want to please you. I pulled out I have this schematic of how I look at my life. I pulled out a schematic of my life, and I began to write out like a vision of the thing that I'm longing for is to hear, "Well done, my beloved son. Well done, my good and faithful servant." I closed my eyes and I kind of reached out for that in my heart. And I said, that's what I'm reaching for with everything that I do in my life. And I've noticed that when I'm in that place, present with that, I enjoy the moments that are given to me. So I think the question that comes to us is, here's how do we sit? How do we enter into this posture of sitting? How do we enter into a posture of waiting on God? And I would like to give you a tool here that I trust that you will be able to work with. And that tool is simply you being able to pause and reflect and be present with Christ. I'm going to ask you in a moment to pause the video and set your timer on your phone for 5 minutes and just sit there and do the following. For 5 minutes, I would like for you to focus on your about 3 ribs up and on the right side of your chest. I'd like you to focus your attention there. I would like you to see an early memory of yourself, innocent, playful, fun, wild with the enthrallment of life, the wonder of life, a picture of that. I would like you to see yourself humbly, graciously, seeking to understand God and life and to connect in a pleasing kind of way with God and life. Have a picture of that here as a child. And then I want you, with your breath, to just whisper the name Jesus for 5 minutes. It's a practice it's called the prayer of the heart. It's the practice of being still, waiting on God. So you'll continue to focus your attention here. And as you breathe, as you continue to do that, you're going to sense a calm presence, an awareness of your present self. The distractions are going to push their way into the periphery. There's going to be a groundedness, a centeredness, a realness and authenticity. And you're going to find yourself connecting with God, sitting at his feet. I'd like you to begin that right now. Press pause, and then in 5 minutes, come back and we'll close out. I've been doing that practice that you just finished for several months now. I'll go sometimes 15 minutes, sometimes 20 minutes every day. I have had visions and dreams. I've become intensely aware of areas of my heart that need to improve and grow. I've become fascinated with God's love and strength. I call this my time of sitting in the presence of Jesus, sitting at the feet of Jesus. The wisdom that I'm gaining, the patience, the strength. It's wisdom indeed. Thank you for walking through this with us today. I trust that your week is going to be not as frenzied and distracted as it was before, that you'll be able to be present in each moment with each person that you're with, that you'll be able to sit. I do think it's important to point out before we go here today that Jesus doesn't criticize Martha for the beautiful good deeds that she's doing. But he's also very truthful. He realizes that there's something that is going on inside of her that is a longing for transformation and change. And the issue really isn't that her sister's not helping her. The issue really isn't that she's got too much to do. The issue is that there's so much worrying, so much fretting. She's upset about a lot of stuff, which is frequently the case with all of us. Somebody cuts us off on the road and we get angry, pull up next to them and give them a finger, yell at them or something like that. And really it's not being cut off that's bothering us. It's something's been festering underneath. There's a disheveled, anxious energy that's just ready to explode. And so we get angry. We go into a rage, and it doesn't have anything to do with that. We may get angry at our kids or get angry at a friend. It has nothing to do with that. It's us, something inside. And this idea of just sitting and being still is part of how Jesus longs to heal us. So, have a wonderful week. And I look forward to next week talking with you about our next posture as we uncover these postures of wisdom that a 21st century world desperately needs.